Okay, so we're going to continue talking about biomes, but we're going to now shift and go into the aquatic ecosystems and the aquatic biomes. So we talked about the main terrestrial ones I want you guys to be comfortable with: tundra, taiga, deciduous forest, tropical rainforest, prairie, savanna, and desert. Biggest things, what are the key features of these biomes? How would you identify it? If you didn't know where you were at, you were dropped down in it, how could you say it's a desert, and how would you describe it? Big main key features is what I want you guys to remember for those land biomes. So now we're going to jump into the aquatic ecosystem and the aquatic biomes. So water follows gravity, path of least resistance. Given fact, anybody trying to stop water, it's futile. You can only redirect it. So when we look at aquatic biomes, we want to start at high elevations, up in the mountains. Rainfall, snowpack, etc. starts up there, and then the water flows downhill, okay, following the path of least resistance. Eventually, it makes its way to the ocean, to sea level. Now, as it flows downhill, the water will accumulate nutrients, pollution, I'm just going to say etc. All sorts of stuff wind up in water as it flows downhill towards the ocean. So a big principle we want to remember is anything we do to an aquatic system will wind up impacting somebody downstream. Eventually, it will come back and impact us because it's just a big circle. It's called the hydrological cycle. It's a circle. The water on our planet isn't going off our planet. It's simply coming back around. It's kind of like your bloodstream. Put something in your bloodstream. Put a needle in a vein in your arm, and that's going to eventually go through your heart. It's going to go to your leg. It's going to go to your skull, to your lungs, to your kidneys, and it's going to circle through your whole body. That same principle applies when we talk about water. So if we dump a bunch of pollution in a lake, it will eventually circle around and go to other rivers and streams and lakes in the ocean, picked up in precipitation, comes back down on land, goes back into the aquatic system. But what we want to consider is, just like in our body, as our blood is flowing through the body, it goes through filters that clean it, that pull out that pollution and keep it safe. Aquatic systems do the same thing as they go through certain biomes, swamps, estuaries. Those are things that help filter pollution and clean water. But if we destroy swamps and estuaries and other key biomes, it's like removing your kidneys or taking out your liver. You're not going to clean your blood as well. Okay, so when we look at water and we start at the high elevation, we are in water that is considered nutrient poor. So high elevation, nutrient poor. This means limited producer base, which means limited biodiversity because you don't have a lot of nutrients. Low producer productivity. So you look at the picture on the left, that's a mountain lake up in Colorado. Clear, cold, great pristine water. But it doesn't have a big producer base, so you don't have a lot of biodiversity there. Lower elevations equal greater amounts of nutrients, which equals a higher producer base, which equals greater biodiversity. Okay, so the lake on the right, nutrient rich, all that green stuff growing. While it may look nasty, that's producer. That's a producer base. It helps increase the productivity of that aquatic system, which means it can feed more herbivores, it can feed more carnivores, and so on up the food chain. but we don't want too high of a producer base. We don't want too many nutrients because that can lead to big problems. There's a thing called eutrophication that we'll talk about. That's a huge issue. All right, so this is when we talk about elevation, high elevation to low elevation bodies of water as it's flowing downstream towards the ocean. Within a lake itself, we can see different biomes, or we call them zones when we're referring to the lake. Each zone will have a different temperature to it because of the amount of sunlight, different water quality. Deeper water, colder water holds more oxygen. Shallow water close to the surface, warmer, less oxygen, but more sunlight. So this is what creates the different zones within the lake. So our littoral zone is the zone right next to shore. This zone right here. Now this zone is pretty tough to live in because if it's dry, your littoral zone may disappear. You have a drought. You may lose 4 or 5 inches of water out of your lake. Now those little plants there are completely exposed. There's no water. Organisms that live in the sand or in the mud now are dried out. So it's a tough zone. It gets hot very easily when it warms up during the day with the sun, and then it can cool off pretty quickly because of the shallowness of that water. If we move out into the limnetic zone, this is the main part of the lake here, the big body of the water here. This is the zone where we see a lot of productivity. Sunlight goes down so far. As long as you have sunlight, you can run photosynthesis. So we'll get producer productivity in that zone. The key, though, with producer productivity in aquatic systems, not plants, but algae. Algae, they are not plants. They are different. That's where your productivity is coming from, your primary productivity. And we can do the same thing with an aquatic system that we did with the land system. We can measure the amount of energy produced and then figure out food chains and trophic pyramids and all those things. So we really focus on the limnetic zone when we're looking at primary productivity, or the amount of calories of energy available in that lake. Dropping down into what we call the profundal zone, way down here, that's the bottom part of the water. That's the cold, dark stuff. There's life, but there's no photosynthesis. So those things down there tend to be decomposers, bottom feeders, scavengers, filter feeders. They're feeding off of things that kind of drift down from the top of the water, dead things, or things that wind up on the bottom of your lake. Now the very, very bottom, the mud, the substrate, the actual stuff you would walk on if you went into the lake, is the benthic zone. This is the actual physical bottom of the lake. No photosynthesis. So to get your energy, you have to be a consumer. Most of the time you're a detritivore. You're eating all the dead stuff that filters down to the bottom of the lake there. Okay, so we're seeing this. We see these different zones in lakes, and we look at what is the primary productivity of the zone to help us understand the diversity that should be in that lake. Okay, now I mentioned eutrophication. All right, let's start drawing this out. With eutrophication, here's our mountains, and here's moving downstream. There's a lake, there's another river, and we're going to make this the ocean shore. Eventually this stream, river, lake, etc. dumps into the ocean shore, into the ocean. So with eutrophication, let me put that in here. Okay, so eutrophication is a rapid increase in nutrients. Every time we get rain, runoff, etc., nutrients are going to go into the body of water, whether it's a stream or a lake or whatever. So consider the water quality. If we start it up here, your water has minimal nutrients because there's no red arrows going into it. Red arrows represent nutrients. If we check the water quality down here, we have 4 arrows worth of nutrients. You go, wow, there's a lot more nutrients. That means the producer base is higher. Let's add a few more arrows, because all of this washes in to these bodies of water. Now if we come back and let's measure the nutrient level down here. Wow, now we're up to 9 arrows of nutrients. This sounds great, right? Well, what's happening is your nutrient load is growing and growing and growing as your water keeps moving towards the ocean. Now, sometimes those nutrients get kind of collected and paused right here and they build up, and we say, ooh, your pond is eutrophicating. So what will happen here when we get these nutrients? Increase in producer base. Let me do this cleaner. Okay, so when you go through eutrophication, increase in the producer base. This equals increase in the consumers. Everything seems to be good. So let's put the little smiley. Yeah, more producers, more consumers, greater diversity, right? Looks good. Well, the problem is, if this happens in a temperate environment, like the Midwest, come winter, your producer base crashes, and then you have an imbalance in the populations and the food chains. So there's a big problem there. So imagine building your pyramid of producers. Your base is big because you had a lot of nutrients. That means you can stack up a lot of levels of consumers above it because of the 10% energy rule. But now when this base crashes this winter because it just got cold and there's no sunlight, your consumers crash. They can't do well because there's not enough food left. This is what you're left with, this block over here. That is not enough food to sustain this size of herbivores population, or carnivores, second carnivores, third carnivores. So these all start crashing as well, and sometimes you lose top level carnivores in your pond because your producer base got wiped out because of this scenario. So you don't want an explosion of your producer base during eutrophication. That rapid increase is not healthy for the ecosystem. So the way to tell if you guys have a pond or you go to a lake, go walk in it. Walk out into that pond, and if you step into that mud and you're sinking 6, 8, 9 inches in that real soft muck, kind of mushy, slimy stuff, that's a sign that eutrophication is occurring. That's all dead or that's all organic matter, broken down, decaying organic matter that's building up in the bottom of your pond. The bigger that layer, the further along in eutrophication that you're going. The concern is, if you keep going, the population that loves eutrophication are the decomposers. So here's our little bacterial cell, decomposers. Because they like, that's supposed to be decomposers there, they like all this dead decaying stuff. And what the decomposers will do is they suck out the oxygen from the water. And then that further compromises your fish and your frogs and your turtles and everybody else, all because of this rapid increase in nutrients. So the closer we are to the shore or the coast, the greater eutrophication usually is. And it's becoming a big, big problem. So what I'm going to do in the next lecture is show you guys this slide. We'll walk through eutrophication. I have a little video here I want to play, but I'll show you what's going on and how all of these different land areas, what we call watersheds, are contributing to eutrophication in the Gulf of Mexico, and how that eventually comes back and bites us in the butt when we're sitting in central Illinois. All right, so let's check it out in the next lecture.